Good afternoon and happy Tuesday to you. John McGinnis with you. So much to talk about this afternoon. We're going to actually keep it on one topic because this is an extraordinary case. And it has to do with a lawsuit against the Federal Park Service, and in particular, the Lassen Lookout Park and that facility and the management of it, and what I think is pathetic. And we're going to hear from the attorneys who represented the family who was so horrifically damaged in this case. But, you go out into nature, you got into the wild, and you can anticipate any number of things can come your way. You could have a bad experience. And I think that comes with part of the risk of going into nature, right? People get that. I get it, certainly. And you can't prevent against everything. But in this particular case, you have a series of events that graphically illustrate and go beyond illustration, I think, to a solid proof and conclusion that there was a knowledge on the part of the person and persons responsible for the maintenance of this park facility, this recreational area, that clearly told a story about an abundance of knowledge that the facility was not safe. In fact, that it was not properly built. It was not properly maintained. It wasn't maintained at all. And there's statements, electronically recorded statements, made on the part of the superintendent of this facility, who spoke very, very clearly to the threat that was not only there but known to be there, and not properly dealt with. In fact, people were invited to this facility. If you're not familiar with the area, it's up in Lassen County, up in the mountains, and it's a kind of a lookout area that unto itself doesn't have a tremendous amount of appeal, but I suppose it's subjective. Some people like this sort of thing. You get up, you can hike up to this lookout point and see a view, and I can appreciate that. I like views. And I can see myself having partaken of this because this is something that I might want to do, especially when you hear the rationale on the part of the family as to why they chose to do what they did. And I'm very happy to have in studio with me two fine lawyers who worked on this case, one of whom is Steve Campora, who's a partner at Dreyer, Babbage, Bucola. Help me out.
Wood and Campora.
Okay. Oh, you're in one of the named partners. And also Catia Saraiva. Did I get it wrong that time? Did I say it wrong? Catia?
You got it.
Catia.
Close enough. Catia.
Catia. I'll get it right from here on. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. I know this doesn't come naturally to you. For lawyers, you're both relatively humble people, and I appreciate that. But I also think this is a story that needs to be told. And first of all, in the opening moments here, what have I, generally speaking, have I set it up properly in terms of what's taken place here?
Close. It's Lassen Volcanic National Park, and it is built because there was a volcano. So the trail we're talking about is a trail that goes to the top of the volcano, and there are views from the volcano, and that's the main attraction in the park.
Okay. And it's man-made, right, by presumably park employees or volunteers?
The trail in question has switchbacks where they had stacked up rocks in the 1920s, and then they backfilled against these rocks to make the trail. In about 1974, 75, they mortared all these rocks together without any footings, and then backfilled against that for the trail. So
you say they did. Who was it?
It was the Conservation Corps that did the mortaring in the early 1970s.
Okay. Under the supervision of
National Park Service.
Okay, so it wouldn't be the current park superintendent, but presumably her predecessor.
Her predecessors, sure.
Yeah. And what's the status? I mean, what's happened over time? How has that been maintained since its original construction?
Well, the information that we got and we discovered during the case was as early as 1994, because of erosion, when the rain came, the water would run under these walls, and there was no footing, so that they became unstable over the time. And we had memos in 1994. We had memos in 2002. We had an expert go up there in 2004 that said they had these footing was unstable and the walls were unstable and they needed to be repaired. And it never happened. It didn't happen up through the time this young boy died in 2009.
And in fact, statement made by Darlene Kuntz, the park superintendent, to the effect that this was a dangerous place. That there was an abundance of knowledge on her part. Is that not correct?
Darlene Kuntz knew when she got there in 2007 that the walls were an issue. That she was told that, and she knew that the walls were an issue. But we had testimony from a trail crew, lead crewman, who testified that he went to her at a meeting. She said, what do you think we should do with the trail? And he said, we need to close it. It's dangerous. Somebody could get hurt. And she said, oh, we're not going to do that, and turned around and ignored him.
And by the way, we reached out to Ms. Kuntz with an invitation for her to tell her side of the story. These are not mere allegations or suggestions or interpretations. These are her words that were spoken at various points along the way, in which she had recorded statements to where she made statements to this effect. And then, of course, in the words of the court, of one of the judges in this matter, actually used the term perjury to describe her testimony in sworn statement, sworn deposition, correct?
Well, what the judge said was she had given a declaration that said she was unaware of any policies that would apply to these trails. And then in her deposition, for page after page, she talked about these mandatory policies. And the judge says, it appears to me she's committed perjury, but we should have an evidentiary hearing so I can hear her side of the story if she has one. But in one place she says, under oath, there are no policies. In the deposition, there's a policy she goes through page by page where it's mandatory that she wrote and signed, that she says, yes, these provisions are mandatory. So how that plays, I can't explain it other than they're certainly conflicting and they both can't be true.
Well, yeah, I think people are, many people are inclined to believe that major corporations with the bottom line as their primary motivating factor, such as General Motors and Toyota, among others, have engaged in this kind of a practice where they want to get people to buy their product, notwithstanding the fact that there's evidence to show a risk to the consumer when the product is used. And I won't say that's accepted, but I think it's widely held belief that that's how corporations do business, because they are so driven by the bottom line. They want to make money. That's their purpose. And I guess I understand a certain amount of that attitude, not to that extent, obviously, but the drive to get the bottom line good, to make the company flourish, to help the stockholders, to help the employees, to help big it to a larger corporation. Obviously, it's unacceptable when they compromise to the extent that they violate the safety of those who use their product. But in this case, there is no such bottom line, and I think the attitude is even worse. And I'm going to give you just a few moments to contemplate that before I ask you some questions about it, both of you for that matter. We got to take a quick break, get it caught up on some other business. But I think that's something that many people have a hard time grappling with. This is the United States Park Service. And it's not a corporation with a bottom line to be concerned about, but it's a facility that exists for the purpose of providing recreation for people who choose to go there. A quick break. We'll come right back after this.
The president focuses on equal pay for equal work. Details at 3:30 on News Radio KFBK.
I got the feeling that something ain't right. I'm so scared.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying on board. John McGinnis here, as is in studio Steve Campora and Catia Saraiva. Did I get it right that time?
Perfect.
Could we record that and just play it over again, the perfect part? Thank you for being here. Both are attorneys who represented, unfortunately, the family of a young boy who lost his life in this horrific tragedy that I believe did not have to occur, and that's what makes it so pathetic in my mind. This is Tommy Botell. What about the Botell family? Can you tell us just a little bit about the Botell family? What kind of people they are, what they're all about?
Sure. They are a beautiful family, five, two girls, and Tommy was the youngest, the boy. And they did everything together as a family unit. They traveled together. They did tasks and chores around the home together. And this was their family summer vacation outing that they planned as a family. And initially their plans were to go to the coast, but because the refrigerator had broken down and they were trying to do the more responsible trip and not go out and spend and put everything on credit cards, they decided let's go camping and hike this trail.
So they drifted to the coast, a more expensive vacation outing for Lassen Volcano Overlook. Is that the right term?
Lassen Volcanic National Park.
Okay. Which it's been described to me as a very ugly place, and the only sparing feature is this overlook, this lookout vantage point. Is that?
It's the moon.
Okay, it looks like the moon. So you got craters and absence of anything.
Shale and no plants.
But from this one vantage point, you have something a little bit unique, right? So that's it. That's the feature.
The views. This trail is the attraction to the park.
That's the draw to this particular park facility. Without that, people would not show up, I guess, is the conclusion, correct?
Exactly.
So Catia, again, you're telling me a little bit about them. They've nice family. They do things together. They all get along. They make this journey that day. And what do they see?
So they're hiking up this trail. It's a switchback trail that the park encourages and advertises to the public. Bring your kids. It's a memory of a lifetime for your kids. And they're doing their little hike up the trail. The kids walking a little bit ahead of mom and dad sit on the trail.
Are there any warning signs about anything at all? I understand there's a big glaring issue that for which there should be a warning sign, but do you see any kind of warning signs?
The warning signs are things like be careful with your dog's paws on the trail. They may cut their paws with the sharp rocks.
Yeah.
Don't step on the vegetation. It hurts the habit, the nature, those types of warnings, but there's really nothing at all about the mortared rock walls.
Notwithstanding the fact that leadership within the Park Service, and there's evidence to support this, had an absolute knowledge of the threat that the conditions of this lookout and this rock structure posed to the safety of anybody who used it.
They had known for years.
And it's well documented. This is not just Steve Campora's theory. You've got evidence to the effect. You've got statements of people who have clearly, unequivocally stated that this is not safe and it needs to change.
Exactly, and the landscape architect from the federal government who went up after the incident said that she had inspected in 12 years. She had inspected more than 50 trails. This was the worst trail she had ever seen, and it was her conclusion that in no way should this trail have been opened to visitors.
And so continuing with the story, the kids hike up ahead because they're kids. That's what kids do, right? And the mom and dad are maybe not such a big hurry, and they're more inclined to pace themselves and use their energy perhaps more wisely, efficiently. Kids get up ahead, and what happens next?
So they sit on the trail, and the mortared rock wall is flushed up against the trail. It's part of the trail. And they're sitting there. Mom thinks, oh, what a cute family photo to take of the two, Tommy and Katrina. And the wall breaks way, a segment of it breaks way loose from the trail and tumbles down and hits Katrina and crushes Tommy. And the nightmare begins.
And both children sustain injuries, pretty serious injuries, correct? Obviously, Tommy's are mortal injuries, but not immediately.
Right. And so Katrina's injuries were a deep laceration to the head with lots of bleeding. She's choking on her blood, all fractures to the face, multiple fractures to her face. And Tommy's injuries were not as visible, and that's why mom and dad initially were so focused on Katrina, because she's choking on her blood. Tommy tries to get up.
And what are the extent of his injuries? What is he?
He basically his brainstem was crushed, and deep gouging laceration to the leg, multiple contusions and other injuries, internal injuries that were devastating, killed him.
How long did he survive? He died at the scene, correct?
He died at the scene, but was able to try to stand up, try to tell his mom, Mommy, I can't see, I can't see. Those were the last words that they heard. And again, they were so preoccupied with the eldest daughter, her injuries were more visible. They told Tommy, it's okay, just lay your head down here on Mommy's lap. She's tending to her daughter, trying to...
Because her injuries were more visible, she had bleeding and...
She's choking on her blood.
Yeah.
And as she's trying to comfort the two, she looks down and realizes that Tommy's no longer with her. His eyes are dilated and open, but he's not there, and he's lost control of his bowel and bladder. And for the next hour and a half, other visitors are trying to perform CPR for about an hour and a half while they waited for help.
That speaks to another. I mean, that there are some risks that people assume when they go into an area like that. I completely understand that. You're out in the middle of nowhere. If that's where you want to be, you don't have the advantage of immediate medical response like you do in a big city or at an amusement park or something of that nature. And I think that the audience understands that. This is a different set of circumstances, and it's a risk that the family assumes knowingly. But the question comes down to, do they have a reasonable expectation of a safe environment, especially when you have posting of certain things about which you should have concern? For example, please don't damage the habitat. Okay, that's well and good. Don't damage your dog's paws. I thought I'd read that there was be sure to hydrate as you hike up this trail.
Yep.
Okay, all well and good. Probably none of that's really necessary. But, we know for a fact, and it's been a matter of public discussion, recorded public discussion, that we know for a fact that this structure is not sound and that it could kill somebody. They don't think to include that in their warnings as people go up there. I think that's reprehensible.
Oh, it's worse than that, because their excuse is, we exercised our discretion not to post signs. They have a placard. It's a huge billboard at the bottom right at the beginning of the trail, at the bottom of the hill. And they have these listed things. These rocks could cut your feet. You should hydrate. All the issues we've talked about, but not one mention of the rock walls that they know are dangerous. And their excuse is, we had the discretion not to put that up. That somehow that will damage the park experience.
Unbelievable. We got to take another quick break. Get you caught up on news, weather, and traffic. We're coming back. I got much more on this. Stick around. Welcome back. Thanks for staying on board. John McGinnis with you, as is Steve Campora and Catia Saraiva from the law office of Dreyer, Babbage, Bucola, Wood, and Campora. And this is an extraordinary case. And again, I said earlier on the program, you kind of expect certain kinds of greedy, selfish behavior on the part of corporate America. Not that I give it a pass, but I understand they're focused on a bottom line. But this is the U.S. Park Service. It's an organization that exists for the purpose of providing recreational facilities to folks. That's their purpose for being in existence, without which they have no purpose. And I suppose there's some that question the rationale behind that existence unto itself. Nevertheless, there's no bottom line. But in this particular case, this facility was not properly built, I would argue, and certainly not properly maintained. There's an abundance of knowledge on the part of the people who run the facility, including but not limited to the superintendent herself. And as you go through this thing and look at what they did prior to this deadly event, which was absolutely foreseeable, there's just no question on it. As you start looking at the evidence here and see exactly how it played out, foreseeability is not in question at all. It was an anticipated event.
Oh, absolutely. It was going to happen to somebody.
But once it happened, then there are other things that I think people have reasonable expectation in terms of the manner in which this is going to be handled. I spent a lot of years of my life investigating such matters. Not every death we investigated was a criminal act. Sometimes you have industrial accidents. You have a number of different types of accidental deaths that you need to investigate for the purpose of making one of a couple of different determinations. First of all, was it or was it not criminal by nature? Was there other negligence that didn't rise to the level of criminal negligence involved? Or was it simply an unfortunate act that caused this death to occur? But in order to investigate in a defensible manner, one of the things you have to have is minimal disruption of the scene itself. The evidence needs to be intact. It needs to be as it was at the time the death occurred, especially when it's the condition of that evidence that is the cause of the death, which appears to be very much the case here. So after this death occurs, and I got to include the very, very serious injury to little Tommy's sister, who I understand is recovered and is doing well now. But she did incur some very serious injuries, life-threatening injuries, but she was able to survive. And what did you experience then?
Well, what happened after the incident was there was supposed to be what's called a board of inquiry, meaning they were supposed to preserve the area. And instead of that, park employees were sent up to knock the wall down. The Park Service, on the day this incident takes place, there's an investigator who comes, he's a criminal investigator from the Department of Interior. He comes to the park and they say, we're going to conduct this investigation in-house. We don't need you. Well, that's a violation of their own policy. He goes back to Washington, talks to people in Washington, and it takes 3 weeks for him to get it turned around, so he's going to do the investigation. During that time frame, the remaining part of the wall is knocked down. It's gone. When he gets there, there's nothing for him to see. Now, they had taken some photographs, but he clearly says it would compromise my investigation because I couldn't document the wall.
Of course.
Off the top.
He has no idea what it looked like at the time the incident occurred.
Exactly. Then they're supposed to be preserving evidence, like things like emails and reports and other documents. And instead of that, they preserve nothing. There's a report written by the landscape architect who comes to the scene, and the superintendent reviews the draft of the report and sends it back and tells her to take the strong language out of the report. Apparently, she's critical of the wall and the way it was maintained, or information. We never could find out exactly what she said because the draft report is destroyed, and they never keep the draft report. They're supposed to keep their emails. Instead of that, they're destroying all their emails. 30 days, they're destroying emails. They're supposed to stop destroying emails and keep them. They didn't do that. The chief of maintenance, the man who'd been at the park 17 years, he retires in December after this incident, and the judge finds that he shredded his entire file. So the man who's in charge of maintenance doesn't keep, nobody tells him you have to keep documents, you have to keep evidence. He shreds his entire file. Incident after incident after incident, to the point that Judge Hollows, to his credit, says there's a willful destruction of evidence on the part of the United States of America.
That's a gigantic statement. Now, with all due respect to yourself, you're an attorney and a fine one at that, but you're representing your clients. The U.S. Attorney is representing the Park Service. So obviously, it's called an adversarial system. So you're not inclined to see things the same way. Now you have the trier of fact, the judge, who's looking at this and reaching this kind of a conclusion, along with another conclusion reached as to the testimony or help me. It wasn't
the conflict between their declaration and her deposition testimony.
And so the declaration, which still is a sworn document, right? I mean, it's got the binding effect and all the consequences of in-court testimony
under penalty of perjury. And
so
not only that, John,
those are huge.
They filed the same declaration 3 times after she'd given a deposition saying there were mandatory policies. I don't know how that happens. Look, we have cases against Ford Motor Company. We have cases against GM. We presume a certain level of advocacy, good guy, bad guy, whatever. This is the United States of America. These are the people who are supposed to be the good guys. They're the ones who are supposed to be protecting the interests of the public. Instead of that, this entity did everything they could to basically hide evidence regarding this incident. I was sitting in my office one day and I got a call out of the blue. Man, I get on the phone, a man named Gene Compton called me. He says, Mr. Campora, my name is Gene Compton. My wife works at the park, and she's being asked to take evidence documents out of the, not for production that you've requested. I said, what? He goes, she works at the park, and she's been told, she gathered all this evidence in response to your requests, and she's being told to take the evidence out, and she won't do it. I said, well, look, I can't really talk to you. You're no longer working for the park, but your wife works at the park. I got to be careful. We hired a retired FBI agent. He went and got a declaration. We went before the magistrate. We got an order that we could take their depositions before anybody could talk to them. We took their depositions, and her testimony was that she had been given a list of requests of documents we'd asked for, including anything regarding notes regarding the accident. And she had gathered all those documents, and she'd taken them to the chief ranger. And then he and the superintendent met, and then they came back and told her to take these documents out, and she wouldn't do it. She said, we need to at least meet with the lawyer and see whether these documents should be produced. And it never happens.
So there are people within the employment of the organization that do have a conscience, it sounds, and wanted to do the right thing. Some stepped up boldly, I suppose, at their own risk of continued employment, or where they may be assigned thereafter. I don't know what kind of things may shaken out after that in terms of employment status or assignment or what have you. But that's a big deal. And it occurs to me, we've got to take a break here again, but as you look at this, I assume this is all in the county of Lassen. Is that correct?
It was the case is filed in the Eastern District right here in town, but the accident's up in Lassen Park.
Okay, so which is the county of Lassen. Why not? I mean, the Lassen County Sheriff's Department, I believe, is also the coroner's office there. So they do death investigations probably on a daily basis. Why not have some role for them to preserve this scene, to look at it, versus the Department of Interior coming from elsewhere with a protracted ETA and a modified scene when they get there to try to process? It just seems to me as though there's so clearly a much, much, much better way to do business. And I think it's lackluster at very best. And of course, you get into the details of this one, it looks like there's an overt effort to destroy evidence, to conceal the truth, and to put forth, not your words, not mine, but perjurious testimony on the part of the superintendent. And I want to find out about her after we take a quick break and see what the consequences has been to her through all this. Quick break. We're coming right back. Don't go away. Welcome back. Thanks for staying on board. John McGinnis here, and wrapping up the conversation about Botell versus the U.S. government, specifically the Park Service, and the death, tragic, horrible, unnecessary death of this little boy, and the profound impact it's had on his family. And I'm happy that the lawyers present here this afternoon have done a good job of trying to bring some level of justice to the family. And I know you prevailed and got a good settlement for the family, and that's all well and good. I'm sure they'd rather have their son alive and well and them struggling to pay their bills. That was how they preferred to live their life. And they did it in a responsible fashion from every indication.
Absolutely. John, before the case settled, there was a day when the judge ruled that the United States had willfully destroyed evidence. And as a sanction for that, he ruled that the United States was negligent in this case for all purposes in causing the death of Tommy and injury to his sister. And that was a big day for the family because all along, what they really wanted was for somebody to say, look at this evidence, look at what had gone on, and say, you were wrong. You did this to this family, and you were wrong, and we're going to hold you responsible. That was a huge day for them.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, and in the course of so doing, emphasize the fact that the conclusions that have been shared this afternoon on this program that I put forth and you put forth, I'm reading the legal documents that I have here in front of me, and I know the information you've put forth is not just your opinion, certainly not just my opinion, but these are the findings of the court. They found that the conduct on the part of the federal government, in this case, the employees therein, has been reprehensible, and that has been perjurious, and has been efforts to withhold the truth from the court. That's huge. That's incredible to me. And I wonder if it speaks to an issue, in our system of justice where the U.S. attorney has a dual purpose. I mean, they've got a component within their office that are prosecutors who prosecute criminal offenders, and then they also serve as counsel to government entities to protect them. So if on the one hand you reach the conclusion that in the course of trying to defend the Park Service, that leadership within the Park Service was engaged in perjury in terms of pleadings put forth before the court in juxtaposition to sworn deposition testimony. That's a big deal. And does that make it more difficult to protect that entity from civil consequences when you see something that looks like it's per se criminal conduct?
I would hope.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's a need for a cleaner disparity there, a separation of the roles. I want to ask you about the good people. We know some people did some horrible things here and broke their rules as not only as federal employees but as decent human beings. But I also know that some people did some extraordinary things, came forward and did what was right, in some cases to their own peril, potentially, as employees of the federal government. Anything you want to make clear on that?
Yes, there were employees of the park. Joseph Pettigrew, the trail crew leader that we talked about, mentioned earlier, he came forward and wanted to tell the truth and was very, very adamant about it, that this was avoidable. The landscape architect, Ms. Dolan, she was very candid and open and wanted to come forward and tell the truth as well. The investigator that we mentioned from the Department of Interior, Alan Foster, also did a great job documenting what he saw as clear deficiencies and problems in the investigation.
His work product was good, right? But how many days was it, or how many hours before he got to the location?
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
You can't. I mean, there's homicide investigators listening to this show right now because I'm getting electronic communication from them. What can you do after 3 weeks with the evidence being not only subjected to the elements and just natural things that change, but in this case where there's an overt effort to change the nature of the scene?
Well, not only that, John, there was another lawyer who handled this case before we got it, and for reasons he didn't do it, but he actually wrote to them and said, please save the evidence, and they told him the interviews was over. It's all done. It's all over.
Yeah.
And it hadn't even started yet. The investigation hadn't even started yet.
Hey, thank you so very much. Anybody else needs a quick shout out just by name real quickly? We're short on time in terms of those who did good work.
Well,
Ron Martin, Ronald Martinez.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks so very much for being here. I do appreciate it. Two fine lawyers from Dreyer Babich, Ucola, Wood, and Campora. And we're going to have you back again because I want to talk to you about the PG&E case out of San Bruno. That's a big one, too. I have a lot of interest.
Absolutely.
All right.
Happy to do it.
Thanks so very much for being here. Have a wonderful evening. As you can tell by the sound of the music, I'm out, but stick around. The lovely Kitty O'Neill is coming up next. Have a great evening. So long.